Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome once again to the Sport Business Podcast, getting you up to speed with the stories powering the global sports industry. I'm Catherine Davies, host of the Sport Business Podcast, and this week I've got Martin Ross and Jonathan Rest on the line to talk about a potential fresh start to the Commonwealth Games, the quadrennial sports extravaganza for the 74 countries of the Commonwealth. We then go south and over to football, where Imran Yusuf and I will dig deep into Spain's LaLiga media rights landscape and its prospects for future media rights revenue growth, before moving on to the news that broke last Friday that German media group RTL will buy pay TV broadcaster Sky Deutschland. So before we launch into this week's discussion, however, I'd like to invite you, our listeners, to be part of the Sport Business Podcast in 2 weeks' time. We're opening up the floor to questions on any topic we've covered to date or any issue facing the global sports industry today. Email us your questions to info@sportbusiness.com, or better yet, send your question through a WhatsApp audio message to the Sport Business team member you're connected with. So get those questions into us by Monday, July 14th, and we'll discuss them in depth in that week's podcast. And now, moving straight into our lead topic for the day, I'm here with Martin Ross, our global news editor, and Jonathan Rest, our global news reporter. Good day to you both.
Hello, Catherine. All right, Catherine, how are you?
Very well. It's good to have you back. And Martin, you've written in recent weeks about Sport5's exit from its long-term Commonwealth Games Federation contract, replacement sponsorship and media rights agencies, and a new host broadcaster. Set the scene for us. Is this an exciting and fresh new start for a much maligned event, or something more nuanced?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. Yeah, I mean, I think the discussion around maybe the future of the Commonwealth Games and Victoria pulling out, etc., has maybe been done to death. So we're going to take listeners through where Commonwealth Games sit commercially. We've done, a series of stories in the last month or two about everything that's happened since and how it's looking. There will be a new start, but also a commercial overhaul and a refit to the size of the Games now. The Games next summer in Glasgow, I say summer, it's 15 degrees here and raining at the moment, but next summer, if we have one, will be 10 sports. That compares to 19 in Birmingham and 22 as it would have been in Victoria in Australia. So, the main thing, that the catalyst for all this has been Sport5's exit. We reported on sportbusiness.com fairly recently that they are exiting Commonwealth Games Federation partnerships, which was a kind of body set up with the CGF to commercialise rights. There was an events concept to it. It was a legacy of Sport5's long kind of sponsorship rights sales through a company called SMAM, which Lagardère bought. So Sport5 kind of wanted out. It's been communicated, if you like, as in-housing of the rights by the CGF. But that has led to a couple of things. One of them is a new sponsorship agency, Red Tiger Marketing, which when we talk about has come on board to sell the sponsorship rights after an RFP. It's led to the media rights being distributed by David White, who's former head of media at Sport5 and also previously of Network 10 in Australia. So his consultancy selling the rights. And I suppose the big one as well is a host broadcast deal, which will not be Sunset and Vine. It will be with Actua Sport, a Swiss-based company that works with EBU. So there's a lot to unpack here, but essentially what's happened is 4 years of commercial prep, maybe usually, sort of being packed into 18 months, which, to say the least, is very challenging.
Well, Martin, you wrote a piece yesterday on the sponsorship sales mandate for Red Tiger, which of course is the new agency founded by former Manchester United CEO Richard Arnold. Who are they and how did they land that gig?
So Red Tiger, correctly, were formed by Richard, who was CEO. Also Lawrence Miller, who was Director of Revenue Strategy at Man U, had a short spell at Live Golf on the commercial side in the UK, and then founded his own agency, Advantage Sport. So I think we'll hear a lot more about Red Tiger in the coming months. I think there'll be quite a big football focus there, given their experience. They set up in October, in stealth mode, and so crouching tiger, hidden rights contracts. But they officially launched at the end of May. They have 23 staff, but they're currently recruiting, staffing up to service this Commonwealth Games sales gig that we wrote about yesterday in news. In terms of other clients. I mean, they're working with other clients, but not really saying who they are yet. They are officially working with Curling Group, which you'll like, Catherine, who bought over the Grand Slam of Curling, selling sponsorships. They're working with a UCI World Cycling team, Team Bahrain Victorious, which I don't know how often they are victorious, Team Bahrain, but apparently very regularly. And they describe themselves as world-class thinking, data-driven strategy, hello two circles, and with operational discipline to help sports organisations realise their full potential. So how did they get the gig? Well, it was slightly complex in that Sport 5 wanted out. They relinquished their equity in Commonwealth Games partnerships. Sport 5 were selling media and sponsorship rights. So once they relinquished that and rights fell back with the CGF, if you like, Glasgow 2026, the organising committee ran an RFP. Red Tiger Marketing won that, and they will represent the rights exclusively. They've already done a couple of deals, but I think they're more on the B2B side, so they kind of want to announce them in the right order to maximise interest. Yeah, they won the RFP earlier this year, and they have the... Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging task, but it's also exciting in terms of this is a new type of event and has certain advantages as well in terms of being very compact and a very different hosting model. So yeah, that's how that came about, and I suspect we'll hear more about them maybe in different sports in due course.
Well, on that subject, just how important is sponsorship to the Commonwealth Games bottom line and ultimately the ongoing success of the Games? And how different will it be with this trimmed down event, just 10 sports down from 19?
Well, first of all, the difference here is there's no public money. I mean, there's perhaps a little bit of public money going into the festivals up here, but I mean, essentially, there's no public money going into these games. So as is well known, the CGF has a pot of £100 million, which is putting into the budget from the Victoria compensation. There's also, I think, £2.3 million from Commonwealth Games Australia. The rest is to be found commercially, essentially. So traditionally, sponsorship would form the biggest part of the commercial budget. It would even outstrip ticketing. So if we look back at Birmingham, £54.6 million sponsorship, that's cash and value in kind. £43.2 million ticketing. If we look back to the last time Glasgow hosted 2014, £43.6 million sponsorship, of which £20.2 million was rights fees, the rest value in kind. So if we're looking to future gaze and say how much is sponsorship part of Glasgow 2026, the total budget for the Games will be between 140 and 150. Let's say take the 150 mark. Then you deduct your 100 CGF, your 2.3, your festival money. I think you've got around 46.5 million coming from ticketing, sponsorship, merchandising, licensing, and broadcast. Now that is a big old decrease from previous Games. So I don't know. You could speculate that it's maybe 15 to 20 million pounds at sponsorship program. So it's still a really important part, but the whole pie has kind of shrunk, if you like. So it's maybe keeping its same level of importance in a much smaller, maybe a battered pie, a deep fried pie up here in Glasgow.
Well, they've cut 9 sports from the program, and I don't know which sports they've cut, but how much of an impact will that make on their bottom line? Have they cut out the more expensive sports to organise, for example?
It's a mixture, isn't it? It's a mixture of the quandary they had was, I suppose logistics expensive, but is there a good parasports program in that sport? Can we build it into our 4-venue cluster? I mean, it's going to be very, very compact in terms of the hosting, which is a good thing and will appeal to brands. So we don't have, we do have cycling, we have athletics, and we have swimming. So those will be the kind of the big ones we've lost, rugby sevens, hockey, badminton, I believe. I think we just need to reset our expectations. It will be, brands love a sustainability story. This will be a very sustainable Games because you will have 4-venue clusters. You can move very quickly between all of them. It's cut in terms of number of sports, but the organisers would maybe tell you that they've gone from 280 medals to 200 medals. It's going to have 3,000 athletes versus, I think, 4,000. It will be primetime TV, although the problem there is, most of the TV deals aren't done yet. But it will have a strong sense of purpose. There will be good full venues. People will buy into it. And a lot of the Scottish firms will get behind it. And there's a lot of muscle memory from the previous Games, not just in terms of a logistics point of view, but also maybe that kind of commercial buy-in. Plus, of course, the inclusion element with parasports. So I'm not saying it's not going to be difficult, but as a different kind of event, I think there will be appeal.
It's not going to be difficult, but bear in mind that it's just over a year from now to when the games kick off. Does that bring in any new challenges, and where are they in terms of how they progressed with organising and bringing in the revenues?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to tick off in terms of what they have to achieve. We've mentioned host broadcast, which is super interesting. We may come back to that. In future podcasts, we'll certainly be doing something for Sport Business Media on that. And that itself is another kind of redressing of expectations. It was a 17.4 million deal for Sunset and Vine paid in Birmingham. It will be much, much less this time around because it's a different concept. So yeah, that was one of the big outgoings they had to get done. They've done it. Actua Sport is appointed, not announced, but is the deal's done. They need to get more international TV deals done. 7 is announced. I think BBC will happen. I think they're close to announcing another international one soon. Merchandising is done, not announced. Ticketing, they're in market to appoint whoever it might be, a Ticketmaster or somebody like that. At that point, they can then go kind of 1 year to go and fully forwards with kind of consumer marketing, if you like, and it starts to take off. But compared to Birmingham at this stage and the challenge that they have, given that they really have come in and saved the Commonwealth Games, if you like, the organising committee at the moment is about one ninth the size that Birmingham was at the equivalent stage. So they really have to staff up as well over this next period. I don't have any doubts that they'll be ready. I think the local supply chain and, as I said, the muscle memory of hosting it, they've got a strong track record of hosting world-class events up here. There's also no public money really, so the procurement can become a bit more agile and easier. But especially on the commercial side, and then also more mundane stuff like venue connectivity, who's organising sports presentation, the ceremonies as well, all this stuff has to be done. So I can't remember an event like this where they've had to pull all this off so quickly. But we will see, and as we've gone through, the bits are in place. They just now have to bring the money in.
Martin, what's the level of awareness like up there for it? Obviously, you were there 11 years ago when Glasgow staged the Commonwealths, and you were there the years kind of before that, the build-up. Is there much awareness that this is actually coming in a year's time, or is it like the rest of the Commonwealth don't really care about it yet?
Yeah, it's hard to kind of extrapolate yourself from if you live in a Commonwealth country, for inverted commas. It is difficult because we do live it and know what it is. But yeah, the Sport 5 thing always kind of amused me because Sport 5 was a very Franco-German company for a long time, and ask any of them about the Commonwealth Games and you'll get a qua or a vas. But it is, people know it's coming, but they're not really talking about it. I think the difference will come after 1 year to go. They'll do some domestic press after they've got the ticketing, and the volunteer program will be launched, I think, in the next few months. That's always a big one. So the mascot is a big, because it gets kids involved. It's a big seller. The mascot's been decided. I don't know who it is or what it is, but that will, at the moment, no, people just know that we've got it and it's a bit smaller. That will change in the coming months. And I think we'll start to get some traction. Even though it will be smaller, people are kind of well versed with these venues at Tollcross, the swimming, and the SEC campus. I think they'll sell out ticket wise. I don't think that will be an issue. But in the lead up and in getting sponsors, you have that kind of perennial problem up here of people only want to talk about football, and the newspapers only want to write about football. So they'll have to really do their best digging out, all the possible Commonwealth stars and current stars. And I say stars, people up here would struggle to name swimmers or cyclists, even though they're very successful. So yeah, that's the big challenge they've got after the 1 year to go, which will come up at the end of this month.
Yeah, I don't see there being any issue from a ticketing point of view, just because you mentioned the three big sports that are going to be there. Two of them in swimming and athletics that are, I think what they call them compulsory sports, don't they? The CGF, and then cycling. So you've got, from a scheduling point of view for TV companies, swimming provides so many sessions that it's great for scheduling and for ticketing as well. So you've kind of got the three big sports that people watch multi-sport games for. If you like, you'll have your people that kind of like their badminton and table tennis that might be a bit disappointed. But I think from a if you're going to have a slimmed down games, you've still got the three biggest draws. And I think commercially, from a brand point of view, ticketing and TV as well, I think it will look and feel like a Commonwealth Games, I think.
I think the look and feel is really important, not just sport presentation, but I mean, this host broadcast appointment was, fair to say, I think unsettled a few. I think there's been a misconception about what Actua Sport is. I mean, it's not just a sort of left field Swiss company. It is sort of effectively the EBU's production partner, kind of the same team that was Eurovision Production Services, so has helped produce events up here before Cycling Worlds, European Championships, various events up here, biathlon, not up here, biathlon, but elsewhere. So, but the budget is the budget. I think production has changed, and Catherine will know more about this than me, but production has changed a lot in the last 4 and 8 years and 12 years, that the savings that can be made in doing remote production. But at the level that they're going in at, can they make it look and feel as slick as the Sunset and Vine presentation was from Birmingham? I mean, of course, the organisers and CGF will tell you they can. But even just pulling that off this quickly, and the number they have will be a challenge. So will it look any different on the TV? Let's find out.
Well, on that subject, you certainly can do most, if not all of the events by Remy remote production, and it looks just as good as if you have an outside broadcast truck there and everything ready to go. It's done remotely. The images are captured at the site and sent back to the master control room. And most broadcasters in North America, ESPN, they're doing a lot of college sports by Remy Productions. So I think that is the way where you can cut your budget by as much as half. And they did that with the Pan Am Games here, the 2023 games in Santiago. The production budget, which was done by MediaPro, were the host broadcasters, and they produced it for around half of what the costs were for the previous games. But it's interesting. I know the subject's been done to death about the relevance of these multi-sport games outside the Olympics, or perhaps even including the Olympics. But that brings me to the Pan Am Games. The host of the 2027 Pan Am Games were a small city in Colombia called Barranquilla, and they were stripped of the right to host it because they failed to make some financial payments, 2 payments of $4 million. And so they went back to Lima for 2027, which hosted the 2019 games, and therefore they had all the facilities. But it really just, are these games feasible for medium to small cities? Are they relevant? And I know that's been done to death, but I think the Pan Am Games example is a telling one.
Yeah, I think this will be really interesting to see how this goes. I think it will be a success in terms of operationally, but let's just see how many Commonwealth Games associations really stay true to their word and how interested they are in future editions. And can the Commonwealth Games... Well, 2 things. Can it survive from an interest point of view in the calendar for athletes, but can the numbers add up for future games? This is a one-off in that you've got 100 million and more funding to offset that. But as we've kind of walked through for the listeners, their commercial matrix is become more complex, and we'll see just how much buy-in there will be. But locally, at local level, pretty confident. But as you say, how much do these events resonate with global viewers and ergo global brands? That's the big question.
Thank you both. Great stuff. We'll take a short break now, and then Imran and I will be taking a very deep dive into LaLiga's media rights revenues, past, present, and future. You won't want to miss that. We'll be right back.
For a weekly roundup of the biggest stories shaping global sport, sign up to the Weekly Digest, our free newsletter packed with essential insights. Subscribe at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast. Now, for the first time in our Sport Business Podcast series, we're introducing a twist to the usual way of doing things. Imran, our editor of Sports Business Media, is going to put me in the hot seat and ask me about the In Focus LaLiga report I spent the last couple of weeks researching and writing. Imran, I'm in your hands.
Yes, Catherine, thanks for letting us turn the tables on you this week. Your In Focus on LaLiga was extremely thorough and insightful, a great deep dive. Well done on that. Now, in the piece, you uncovered that LaLiga's media rights revenues are about 1.96 billion this season. Very healthy number, comfortably over $2 billion. And over the past decade, both its domestic and international rights have doubled. However, the league does face headwinds, I think you'll agree, and was perhaps fortunate to increase its media rights revenues in the current cycle. Is that right?
Yes, they have increased their media rights. And that increase has been driven by a rise in international media rights revenue, which are up about 11% in this 2024 to 27 cycle over the previous one. And we'll look at international media rights later. But I think it's important to look at the domestic rights because there are some unique factors there and some that are common to all the major leagues in Western Europe and beyond. Now, domestic rights for LaLiga have largely plateaued. There's a similar situation with Italy's Serie A. Their domestic rights were down by 2.6%. The Bundesliga was up by just 1.9% or so. The Premier League's domestic rights rose by around 4%, which was its lowest rate of increase in years. And with Ligue 1 in France, well, it's hard to know after the collapse of the DAZN deal and most recently Canal+ refusing to carry the channel. But in Spain, the domestic rights for the first and second division are sold together by LaLiga. And the revenues brought in have flatlined due to all the usual factors, cross-carriage deals between the operators, falling pay TV subscribers, continuing piracy despite Mr. Tebas's best efforts, and myriad other offers for content from YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, and so forth. So if we look at the first of those reasons for the plateau, carriage deals between the operators, Telefonica and DAZN between them split the premium packs of live rights to LaLiga. And in 2022, Telefonica agreed a carriage deal for DAZN, and they've cooperated elsewhere. So there really isn't competition in the market like there used to be. And then, of course, Telefonica's Movistar platform accounts for nearly half of Spain's 7 million pay TV subscribers. And they have been losing subscribers at a rapid pace in recent years, nearly 900,000 fewer in the 4 years from 2019 to 2023, although that rose by 300,000 subscribers in 2024 due to stringent anti-piracy measures and new bundling. And of course, piracy does remain a concern, as does the fact that consumers have been hit by a cost of living crisis, and they're awash with content from all these suspects, Netflix, Amazon, and so forth. So domestic rights are largely flat, but if you look at where they've come from, as you said, a decade ago, they were earning just over 600 million for the domestic rights, and that's largely because they sold those rights individually. The club sold them individually to different operators, and now they've been centralized from 2015, and what they brought in from domestic media rights is about double what they earned a decade ago. So they've done well there. But where they've really done well in the last couple of years is with the two channels that LaLiga markets directly to consumers. The LaLiga Hypermoción, not sure if that's quite how you say it, it's Hypermotion Hypermoción. That's the second division channel. And then the LaLiga TV bar service, which is the pubs and clubs channel, commercial establishments. So when they auctioned the pack, or the lote, as they say in Spain, for the second division rights in 2022, they received no bids. They made the decision to take the rights in-house and create a channel called LaLiga Smartbank TV. And that was after the sponsor back then. And they licensed it on to operators around the country. In that first season, they had 11 operators, including all the big ones, Telefonica, Vodafone, Orange, and Amazon Prime. And this past season, the channel was carried on virtually every pay TV platform in the country, with a total of 22 operators. So it's available to pretty much every household that has an internet connection or a pay TV subscription. And the other success story is the LaLiga TV bar service, what we call the pub and club channel for commercial establishments. That's done very well. It has about 35,000 subscribers across the country. And LaLiga's made it really easy for establishments to get it. They simply have to call up and they get a set-top box delivered probably the next day or in the next couple of days. And the fees they pay are determined by their location. Big bar in Madrid is going to pay much more than a tiny little bar in the Alpujarra region, for example. And it depends on how many tables they have in their establishment, what their turnover is. So there's a tried and true, ready to go formula. And like I said, it's just a phone call away. So they've done really well with that. And some observers say that they've earned close to 200 million euros a season from these two channels. So that has helped keep the domestic rights at least stable and probably slightly up in what they were in the past cycle. One thing that I found really interesting about the bar service, it's called Canal Oreca, or the Oreca channel, and I thought that was like a Spanish brand name or something, but it turns out, and it's pretty obvious, it stands for hotels, restaurants, and cafeterias. So the LaLiga TV bar service is offered to commercial establishments through Movistar Plus, through Orange, and through Vodafone, and direct to businesses through Bar TV, which is a MediaPro-owned streaming service. And it's also offered through the Plus Bar Sport TV, which is a 90 million euro initiative launched in September 23 by Mau San Miguel, which is a Madrid-based brewer that signed on as the global sponsor of La Liga for a 5-year deal running from 2022 to 27. So what I find appealing about this particular deal is that establishments that sign on to the Mau San Miguel service receive shipments of beer as part of their subscription. Sounds like a good deal, no?
Bigger deal, making us thirsty now. And our listeners, I'm sure, will be very grateful to finally learn what HoReCa means, or rather stands for. Now, of course, you touched briefly at the beginning on international rights sales. As you said, they're a little behind the Premier League in that. Who isn't? But well ahead of the other European leagues. Your number for 24-25 is 765 million euros for international rights revenues. Now, these for years have been handled by MediaPro, the big Barcelona-based multimedia communications giant. People have often talked about La Liga and MediaPro being joined at the hip. Recent moves, though, suggest a sort of change of direction for international media rights distribution. And these movements come in the midst of MediaPro being pushed out, that's already confirmed, of the broadcast services contract that's been awarded to Infrance HBS and the telco Telefonica. What's happening with La Liga and MediaPro?
Yeah, you're right, Imran. MediaPro has been distributing La Liga since the late 1990s. And in Spain, they're virtually synonymous with La Liga, not just for the media rights, but also for production. And they have more than tripled revenues for the international media rights since the rights were centralized in 2015. And of course, they've earned very healthy commissions along the way. But the erosion on their grip of La Liga's international media rights started with La Liga's joint venture deal with Relevant Sports in 2018, which resulted in the creation of La Liga North America. And of course, Relevant is the U.S. group owned by billionaire Stephen Ross, who also owns the NFL's Miami Dolphins and the Hard Rock Stadium, and they organize the Formula One Miami Grand Prix. And that deal covers, well, the U.S. and Canada, and it was extended in 2021 to Mexico and Central America. And it's been successful by any measure. It resulted in a 60% increase in the rights fees coming from the US and Canada through a deal with Disney, which includes Canada through TSN, which is part owned by ESPN. And then they doubled the value of the deal with Sky Mexico for Mexico and Central America, although MediaPro was influential in achieving that deal. And Relevant, of course, organizes tours of La Liga teams to North America. And in short, it's been a very successful joint venture for La Liga and one they've been keen to emulate elsewhere. And then to further the sort of distancing of MediaPro, in May 23, La Liga announced a new strategic joint venture partner, Peak, which is a 50-50 JV with Ocho Sports Partners, headed by Simon Denyer and Bruno Rocha. And Peak's involvement has been growing ever since. They've even closed some contracts that are part of MediaPro's remit, such as the deal sealed last November in Russia, where they secured a doubling of revenues in a deal with Match TV. And they were also involved in the deal signed with FanCode in India earlier this year, and they're understood to be actively working on new deals in China. And so all three of those areas are part of MediaPro's remit. MediaPro's deal was renewed for 5 seasons, and it expires at the end of 2028-29. They didn't respond to requests from us, so we can't fairly represent their position. But industry sources do suggest that La Liga will take more work in-house and will work more closely with Peak over the remaining years of the contract. So we'll just have to see what happens in a few years' time. And the whole question of the production, as you mentioned, the deal that's been done with HBS, that's a huge chunk of MediaPro's annual turnover. Last count was about €1 billion a year. And I do find that extraordinary because La Liga's really put its stamp on production of La Liga for domestic broadcast and for their international partners. They were the first to use cinematic cameras. They do 16:9 orientations for TikTok. They use fan cameras, drone cameras, and entire generations of broadcast crew in Spain have grown up working on La Liga productions. And, that's 21 matches each weekend between the first and second divisions. MediaPro has one of the biggest fleets of outside broadcast trucks in the world, and certainly in Spain. And they have master control rooms, studios, the cutting-edge technology in use all across the country. And I worked with MediaPro Canada for some years, and while, of course, these productions in Canada were much smaller, many of my colleagues had worked on MediaPro productions in Spain and elsewhere. And the scale and capacity of what they do is tremendous. So that's not to say that HBS can't apply the same level of expertise and manpower and technology. It's just that it will be challenging for them, especially given that the next season starts in just a few weeks, doesn't it? So for HBS, it will be difficult for them to emulate what MediaPro has done. Not impossible, but it will certainly be challenging. And I suspect they'll be hiring a lot of the broadcast crew, who of course are mostly freelance. They'll be using them, and they will probably have to use a lot of MediaPro's kit. They'll be renting their studios and trucks if they don't bring them across the border. But I suspect that MediaPro will tangentially be involved in production through rentals in the next period. But the deal with HBS really took the lid off what's been brewing for some time, I think, and that's increasing friction between MediaPro boss Tacho Benet and Javier Tebas of LaLiga. Tebas was on very good terms with Jaume Rures, the co-founder of MediaPro back in the 90s with Tacho Benet, and Jaume was forced out in 2023, and I understand that relations are tense between Tacho Benet and Javier Tebas, and of course the wheels really came off with the HBS announcement. We saw the press release that MediaPro fired off, which they later retracted. But I think those deteriorating relationships could be problematic for MediaPro the next time the international media rights contract comes up.
You touched on Relevant Sports Group and the joint venture in North America. You also touched on China and India. I want to come back to those areas because it was a very successful joint venture, I think, with Relevant. Listeners will, of course, know they're Relevant are now selling commercial rights to UEFA club competitions. But with LaLiga, it's all gone very well. And I think LaLiga have tried to emulate that model in certain other territories, China, MENA, as you said, the Indian subcontinent, not quite with the same success. Tell us more.
Well, you know about the Chinese deal because I think you wrote the story a couple of years ago about how LaLiga won a legal battle, 47 million euro legal battle against Supersports Media over missed media rights payments. They'd sealed a joint venture with Supersports Media for their commercial rights. And at the beginning, I believe that Supersports had committed 90 million euros a year. Those were in the heady years of the Chinese sports media rights market, weren't they? And this was later negotiated to around 45 million euros per season, but the deal was terminated in August 2022 over missed rights payments. And then LaLiga went on to sign a deal with China Mobile for about 4.5 million euros, which is about 90% less than the renegotiated deal. So the LaLiga deal was really the last of the big European football rights deals to fall apart after the crash of the Chinese market. And that was when PP Sports nearly collapsed itself under the weight of payments to these leagues, including $233 million per year deal to the Premier League. So I think the deal, you mentioned Galaxy Racer in India and the Middle East, and that's different. It's less about market forces and more about getting into bed what turned out to be quite an unreliable partner. In September 2022, the LaLiga sealed a joint venture with Galaxy Racer, which is a 3-year-old, at the time it was a 3-year-old company with little to no experience in the world of sports and media rights. And they partnered with it basically for the sale of LaLiga's media rights in MENA and India. And the MENA part came about because of tension at the time with LaLiga's previous rights holder, beIN Sports, in the Middle East and North Africa. And of course, beIN is owned by Qatar, which also owns Paris Saint-Germain in Liga. And the Qataris were very cross, to say the least, with Javier Tebas's overt and very public criticisms of PSG's financial and transfer policies. And so they withheld funds from the contract and they turned down a renewal, which is not a small consideration considering that that was LaLiga's second biggest market. So in September of that year, LaLiga signed a 15-year deal with Galaxy Racer, which was basically a letter of intent to form a 50-50 joint venture with them called LaLiga and MENA and South Asia DMCC. And what is surprising is that the documents show that they forecast that it would generate over $3 billion over the 15-year term for LaLiga's rights, MENA and the Indian subcontinent. And now we don't know a lot about Galaxy Racer, but it's a company that was created by a young Indian entrepreneur, Paul Roy. And its focus up to then had largely been esports, gaming, lifestyle content, and merchandising. And so as part of that signing, Galaxy Racer committed to all kinds of things, like a net profit of over $4 million in the first year, a $6 million upfront payment, $30 million of value in kind. And they promised, as I said, nearly $3 billion in media rights revenues over the 15-year period from MENA and the Indian subcontinent. And so the plan had been to go in the Middle East and North Africa with a country-by-country approach. And I think we all know that that's quite difficult to do when beIN Sports is willing to pay 120, 140 million. You're just not going to get that much revenue by going to the individual countries. And in India, Galaxy Racer refused to negotiate with the incumbent, Viacom18, which of course is now owned by Reliance Industries. And instead, they said it was going to create its own streaming service with 800 million followers. Over the course of 2022-23, there were no revenues incoming from either commercial or media rights sales from either region. And so LaLiga scrabbled around for a solution in MENA. And in the end, Miguel Ángel Gil, who's the president of Atletico Madrid, called on his good relations with Nasser, the president of beIN and Paris Saint-Germain. And they sealed a new deal with beIN on the condition, I understand, that Tebas stop picking on PSG. And so that deal was sealed in June 2024 for the 24 to 28 cycle. And there was no mention of Galaxy Racer in that deal, although it's never been publicly acknowledged that the JV was no longer functioning. But the Galaxy Racer venture was maintained in the Indian subcontinent for 2024-25 and beyond. And to be blunt about it, the results really weren't pretty. There were rumors of non-payment of employees. Roy left Dubai and closed the office there and moved to India. And then the company launched the GXR app with LaLiga, Serie A, and Ligue 1 rights for the Indian subcontinent. It resulted that there were a lot of problems with the app. There were technical issues that led to it crashing during the first Clásico of the 2024-25 season. The Clásico, of course, the big match between Real Madrid and Barcelona. And that led to massive piracy as fans desperate to watch the match turned to, illegal streaming, which is quite ironic given Javier Tebas's crusades against piracy. So by December last year, it was understood that Galaxy Racer hadn't paid any of its promised $4.5 million rights fee for the season. And in February this year, both La Liga and Ligue 1 cut the signal to Galaxy Racer over non-payment. And in May, La Liga announced it was ending its deal, and it reached a 5-year deal with FanCode, the sports streamer, for about $2 million a year. So a long way off from what they were initially promised through Galaxy Racer. And I've spoken to a couple of senior executives who have knowledge of the deal. One of them said that he was surprised that La Liga went for it, an untested company that had only been in the market for 3 years, that had promised exorbitant returns. And at the time of the deal, didn't have a platform. And they certainly didn't have the ability to offer those big bank guarantees that they said they would. And then another executive said that they found the offer very compelling because the Indian subcontinent's a market where the rights weren't worth very much to start. And arguably, you have enormous potential given the sheer size of the population and the potential for growth. So he thinks that La Liga probably bought into the growth plan and what could be delivered. But it's such a difficult market for so many rights holders, and there's very little visibility. So unfortunately, even though it hasn't been publicly announced that the joint ventures have been completely scuppered, it doesn't seem to be ongoing. And so far, the relevant joint venture is a huge success to date, and that hasn't really been emulated elsewhere.
Yep. Well, for more details on that, and indeed all the other territories, the Americas, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, basically everything you ever wanted to know about La Liga's media rights, but we're afraid to ask, head to Sport Business Media for your in focus. Thanks, Catherine.
You're most welcome. We'll speak to you in the next section. After a short break, we'll be right back.
Enjoying the conversation? Follow the Sport Business Podcast and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And if you're finding it valuable, leave us a rating and a review to help others discover the show.
And welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, bringing you the latest sports business industry news. In this final segment, we're going to swing up to Germany and discuss the news that broke last week, that media giant RTL is going to buy Comcast Sky Deutschland operations. Martin, you know all about this. Can you set the scene for us?
Yeah, it's a long story, sort of background, I suppose. Nearly 3 years since Comcast started looking for a buyer for Sky Deutschland. I think it's been a surprise to some in that they kind of almost forgotten about it. I think the Bundesliga tender, there was a bit of a pause, if you like, in terms of how active the sale process was. I think it was a bit of a surprise to some people, some leading people at Sky Deutschland and RTL. Some of them read about this in Bild-Zeitung So they've done very well to keep it under wraps. The nuts and bolts of the deal, we'll maybe come on to talk about the purchase price, but for an upfront sum of 150 million euros, but it's more complicated than that. RTL's buying Sky. They say that they'll have 11.5 million paying subscribers. Obviously, Sky Sports rights are German Bundesliga, Premier League in England, Formula One. They will merge that with RTL's own brands, and then they will unite their OTT subscriber streaming services. RTL, perversely for I suppose a free-to-air network, it has a subscription streaming service. Then, we'll talk about the mechanics of the deal, but RTL itself already has various sports rights, second Bundesliga live rights coming up for the new cycle, UEFA Europa League, German national team with ARD ZDF, and a deal with Sky for free-to-air Formula One. It also ends any chance of, and they confirmed this, that they will not be merging with ProSieben Sat.1, so a big sort of commercial rival. So finally a buyer for Sky, heavily loss-making Sky Deutschland over previous years. Yeah, the purchase price, another asset, going to remind us that the glory years, if there ever were glory years of the pay TV broadcasters, are very much over following years of churn and the move to streamers.
Well, John, you were going to come in, I think, with another angle here about RTL and the Bundesliga rights and the fact that RTL is becoming a proper challenger for premium rights in Germany.
Yeah, absolutely. After, obviously, Sky and DAZN earlier, last December, kind of secured the rights for the next cycle of the Bundesliga, but Sky very much the dominant player. I think around 4/5 of the packages will go to them. But interestingly, when you kind of look through the outcome of that auction, the DFL managed to keep all of their previous partners, but the new player that came in was RTL. They've got a package of second division Saturday matches, which they share with Sky, although they're the same thing now. They picked up some highlights rights. They actually went for the big highlights package, ARD Sportschau, which they didn't get. But people I spoke to in Germany had described RTL now as ones to watch for larger rights packages in the Bundesliga, given, as Martin said, they're a free-to-air, but they also have this paid streaming operation, so they have a way of monetizing a large outlay on these rights. If you then fast forward to May time, the DFB, the German FA, put out their tender, or they announced the results of their tender for the DFB Pokal Cup, and while they still have a package of that to sell, one of the newcomers on board is RTL for highlights. So just over the last kind of 6 months, they've really been making a push for premium football rights. And if you look at Dana Strong of Sky's quote last week, she said, talking about RTL, she said the calibre of the rights we acquired out of the Bundesliga auction spurred them, i.e. RTL, into action. So clearly, while we understand that, certainly what the DFL were telling people was that the reason they got such a good result in the domestic tender was because Sky was no longer in a active sales process. You know, they were almost not quite taken off the market, but certainly their focus was on retaining the large package of Bundesliga rights. And obviously RTL in the background have kind of been looking at that and decided that, you know, this is the prime opportunity now and the chance to buy into that.
So, Martin, going back to what RTL is alleged to have paid for Sky Deutschland, the headlines were saying that they got it for a mere 150 million euros. But the terms of the deal are much more complex than that. Nevertheless, what does the value that's being bandied about in the press, what does that tell us about the landscape? And what do you think the real value is?
Yeah, well, for once, we don't have to use allegedly or bandied about, in the sense that they did announce the term deals. The upfront payment is 150 million euros. So that kind of led to stories about RTL Group buys Sky Deutschland for 150 million, which people looked at and obviously saw that as very, very cheap compared to the valuation that was put around of 1 billion sort of 3 years ago, just when it started to go on the market. The purchase price could exceed 500 million euros. Now, the mechanics of that are that tied to RTL Group's share price. So it's a bit like a football transfer. There's a guaranteed sum, and then there's sort of performance clauses related to how a club does, you know, if it wins the Champions League or if it gets the Champions League group stages. By that, I mean, if the RTL share price exceeds 41 euros. Now, at the moment, it's sitting at 36 45 when I last checked. 5-year high is 52 euros. So if it exceeds 41, then Comcast can start to get a payback, essentially, up to 377 million euros. But they will only get that 377 if the max payment is tied to a share price of 70. Now, RTL Group hasn't hit a share price of 70 since 2018, so that's, you've got to say, is probably pretty unlikely. But there is another, 9-figure payment to be made here in all likelihood, but it's probably unlikely to eclipse 500 million. And, if we're talking about a couple of 100 million essentially for what was, the powerhouse pay TV broadcaster in Germany, that shows us exactly how the market is falling, exactly how many, subscribers have been shed. This is a company that's been, as I say, hugely loss-making. And Rupert Murdoch is not a stupid man, as we know. He would have seen, what's coming. I mean, he had great aspirations to build this into, obviously a European pay TV giant. The purchase price for Comcast for the Sky Group, of course, that's, Sky PLC in UK and Italy, £31 billion back in 2018. So I think, that Comcast have been keen to rid themselves of Sky Deutschland and Sky Italia. There's been a 3-year restructuring period for Sky Deutschland. They claim that they will be EBITDA break-even this year. So what's RTL buying? It's buying rights, it's buying content, it's buying customer data. You can have a long argument about whether they've got a good deal or not. I suppose for a couple of 100 million euros, if they've got all that and they can push forward with all that customer touch points and those rights, then yeah, they have got a pretty good deal.
Right. Well, that's a sign of the times, isn't it? What's happening with pay television across Europe and further afield. Thanks for that, you guys. We'll wrap up the main part of the podcast here. And after a short break, we'll reveal what we're looking at for the week ahead. We'll be right back.
Want to get the full story beyond the headlines? Subscribe to Sport Business for exclusive news, data, and expert analysis. Learn more at sportbusiness.com.
Now, let's move into the final part of today's Sport Business Podcast. John, Martin, next week, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so today is Thursday, 3rd of July, so I'm actually looking to tomorrow and a potential day of independence for the Uruguayan FA and their long relationship with Tenfield. Basically, they are, as many people know, have been locked in together for years, with Tenfield holding the domestic Uruguayan league rights. July the 4th is when, if there's no bid accepted or an acceptable price has come in for the next cycle, 26 to 29, then the Uruguayan FA are able to go to an open tender. So far, Tenfield and the AUF, the FA, have had, I think, 3 meetings in the last couple of weeks to try and thrash out a decent offer. Latest is that the offer from Tenfield is nowhere near what the league thinks it's worth. Tenfield has apparently offered $25 million a year, up to 30 million when you're adding some merchandising. That is a healthy increase on the 17 million per season at the moment, but the league or the federation itself has done hired a consultant who thinks it's worth 50 million a season. So there's a big old gap in there. So it'd be interesting to see if the FA kind of goes to an open tender. Worth noting that Tenfield does have a matching clause in that anyway, so it could end up with that. But there's been talk recently of a potential newcomer, is that right, into that market, Catherine?
Yeah, well, I was reading some of the Uruguayan press today, as you do, and it seems that Tigo, which is the telco owned by the Luxembourg company Millicom, they are being seen as a serious competitor, and largely because they have the money based on their mobile internet business across several Latin American countries. They have the experience, they have the platforms, and the rival bid that they may be behind is apparently being led by a former Tenfield executive, so somebody who will know the business inside out. And just as a reminder, Tigo Sports, the Millicom sports channels, they hold the pay TV rights. They hold exclusive rights to the Paraguayan First Division next door. So they certainly have the experience. And another tangent to that is there have been a group of 12 clubs, 9 from the First Division and 3 from the Second, who went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport trying to get them to urge. What they wanted was the league to separate from the federation, from the AUF. They want to be able to negotiate directly with broadcaster, Tenfield or whoever it may be. And the Court of Arbitration for Sport ruled in favor of the AUF, the federation. So the federation continues to lead these negotiations, and the clubs basically just have to say yes or no. They don't get to be involved. So lots of interesting things going on there, and we'll find out tomorrow what's happening.
I'm just wondering if Telefe and Televisia Univision have a big footprint in Uruguay, Catherine?
Not at all, as far as I know. No, I mean...
If you've not listened to last week's podcast, you'll find that a bit odd.
Yeah.
But yeah, Catherine can pronounce these expertly, in case anybody hasn't listened.
Telefe.
Someone's been practicing.
That's right. Well, there's TYC Sports, of course, which is the Argentinian broadcaster, and they do have a footprint in Uruguay. But as far as I know, they're not involved. What else are you guys looking at?
Yes, August the 13th is a big date. Big date for me, not because it's a week before my birthday, but it's the bidding...
And mine.
Oh, wow. Of course. It's the bidding deadline for the media rights in the Indian subcontinent and, most importantly, India in terms of value for the Olympics. We wrote a story just this week on that process. IOC will, as expected, package those rights for LA when cricket will be there. With rights as well to 2032, when you would have thought cricket might still be there. So it is a huge opportunity to make a big impact in the Indian market. We don't need to educate people about how much of an impact cricket can have on what broadcasters are willing to pay. Viacom 18 is the incumbent. There will be huge interest in these rights, and we also think that India is going to send a very strong team to the Olympics. That's signals at the moment. So exciting times for not just the IOC accountants, but also, cricket fans in India.
Well, can I take us back over to Latin America, where we published a story last week on cricket in Brazil, which might sound a bit odd to many of our listeners, but as you were just saying, cricket is going to be on the Olympic program in 2028, and it was recently admitted to the Pan Am Games program, which, according to the president of Cricket Brazil, former English cricketer called Matt Featherstone, that is a game changer for cricket in Brazil. And it's also quite extraordinary what they've done there. They've created social programs to bring children out of precarious situations in their neighborhoods with drugs and violence, and they've given them a cricket bat and ball and brought them up to the national team. They have a centrally contracted women's national team. And as of August 1st, they're going to centrally contract the men. And based on that, the women are now the number one ranked team in South America. And they've got not just the Olympics, but the Pan Am Games to aim for. So very much the other end of the scale from India, but a heartwarming story. And I would urge our readers to have a look at that story on cricket in Brazil. Right. So let's go on and see if there's any other business. Martin, do you have something?
Bit of a rant with a point. Big golf fan, as you know. I don't want to go full Peter Alliss on you. I suppose for any non-UK listeners, Peter Alliss was a very famous and very funny, slightly controversial commentator on the BBC when it had live golf rights. He used to complain about, I suppose, the conduct of players. I'm just wondering whether we're at the point, and I think we're not because there's no appetite to do it, but whether we're at the point where we will ban players from major tournaments that they really want to play in to get on top of the sort of lack of respect that's being shown by players, PGA Tour, DP World Tour, and also live golf players. They're all guilty of it. The swearing is the swearing, and I think, that kind of hot mic stuff, I don't mind that. And I think, I'd happily watch football with swearing. I said that previously. It's, if you're watching after a certain time on Sky, whatever, that's fine. It's a frustrating game. But we've had recent examples, Brooks Koepka, Tyrrell Hatton, Rory McIlroy, and Stefan Jaeger, a German player on the PGA Tour. Brooks Koepka most recently, he just repeatedly thumped his driver. Obviously swearing, thumped his driver, and then the new thing is to take a swing at the tee marker, the big kind of tee marker you have on the tee, and it nearly hit a spectator, apparently. So the Tyrrell Hatton one's just kind of hacking up a fairway. I don't mean a divot, but like purposely hacking up a fairway, swearing to yourself and then heading off and just leaving somebody else to sort it out. Or the one that Peter Alliss used to hate, and I do agree with him, is the kind of just spitting. And, I would, let's maybe not go to that route, but if you're playing football, it does happen. But, if you're playing golf, and like one of the players did, and you just walk up to the range to see your coach, you've not been active, you just walk up to the range and you just kind of gob on the ground when the camera's on you. Nobody wants to see it. So players get fined, but at what point are we really going to hit them where it hurts and actually ban them from tournaments? I was guilty of some club thumping in the 90s to the sounds of Chumbawamba. But, I was a teenager, and teenage boys particularly, I think girls maybe mature a bit faster and are maybe not quite so quick to show their anger on a golf course. But look, we've all been there as golfers, but we've not all been paid millions to do it and had cameras on us. So let's maybe rein elements of that in, or maybe I'm completely wrong and I'm not reading the young team and they all want to see that. It's a point of discussion anyway.
Well, you're talking about things that people don't want to see. And John, I think you were going to mention something that people do want to see, and going over to Wimbledon. Yeah,
I felt sorry for the BBC News reporter who had to queue up at Wimbledon, the famous queues, and interview two, I assume they'd had a drink, kind of 25-year-old, kind of rather smartly dressed men who had banners protesting the loss of the line judges, as you remember in our piece last week where we said the AI has taken over. They were very upset, very red-faced, maybe because of the heat, at the absence of the line judges, and were calling for their return because it was kind of anti-British. So, that's one to end it on.
Great. I think that's a great way to wrap up this week's podcast. Thank you both. Well, as usual, we've covered a lot this hour. Thank you all for your input and insight, and I'll look forward to more of the same next week. And as a reminder to our listeners, in 2 weeks' time, we want you to be a part of the pod. Please send us your burning questions of the day on any topic that you've heard discussed on this podcast or that you'd like our team to delve into. You can email a question to info@sportbusiness.com, or better yet, send your question through a WhatsApp audio message to the Sport Business team member you're connected with. So get those questions into us by Monday, July 14th, and we'll give them the Sport Business treatment. And if you want to know more about today's stories or any of our other reports and analyses, and especially if you're looking for the world's largest collection of accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship, you can take a look at subscription options on our website or get in touch with us via email at info@sportbusiness.com. Again, that's info@sportbusiness.com. If you enter the code SBPodcast30 at the checkout, and that's SBPodcast30, you'll get a 30% discount on annual and monthly Sport Business subscriptions. You can also share your thoughts on this episode and give us your feedback in a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms. And watch for our weekly LinkedIn posts promoting the podcast, where you can, of course, leave a comment. Thank you all for tuning in, for reading, for subscribing. I'm Catherine Davies, and we'll be back again next week with the Sport Business Podcast.